Partial but significant. Government forces in Yemen capture parts of Taiz as a Houthi delegation holds talks in Saudi Arabia. What does it all mean for the conflict in Yemen? And is a political solution still possible? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Sami Zeidan. It was almost a year ago that Saudi Arabia launched Operation Decisive Storm, an air campaign meant to quickly overthrow Houthi rebels who had taken control of Yemen's capital, Sanaa. Well, that operation became an Arab coalition, then ground troops joined the fight. Few thought the Houthis would be able to hold on to power this long. But the coalition is now making gains. It has ended the Houthis' 9-month siege of Taiz, the third largest city in Yemen. Yemeni officials say they can now deliver aid to about 200,000 residents. And they claim government troops are close to entirely taking back the city. But what is the strategic value of Taiz, and how will this military advance affect talks being held between Saudi officials and Houthi leaders? Lots to discuss with our guests, but first, Al Jazeera's Hisham sets the story up for us.
Troops loyal to President Abdurrabbu Mansour Hadi break through Houthi lines in Taiz, partially breaking a siege on Yemen's third largest city. They can now send humanitarian aid and weapons from the southern port city of Aden. For the government, the latest gain is a major development in the push to capture the capital, Sanaa.
The siege of Taiz was broken. This is a big issue. The wheels have started to roll. It might seem slow, but the efforts are huge.
But the fight to control Taiz is far from over. These are Houthi fighters trying to hold ground in Jahmaliyah, their stronghold in eastern Taiz. But despite the heavy fighting and gain made by government forces, the Houthis remain defiant.
The invaders will be defeated. We will destroy them, and we will win the fight.
This is a funeral of Houthi fighters killed trying to defend Taiz. The Houthis are backed by elite Republican Guard units loyal to former President Ali Abdullah Saleh. The Houthis were hoping to expand their presence in Yemen and consolidate their grip on power. Marib is an important battleground for the Shia rebels. These are Houthi fighters trying to repel a government offensive in the oil and gas-rich province. Pro-Hadi fighters are trying to break down Houthi strongholds in the east and the south so that they can move north to capture the capital. If they do that, the Houthis might lose the war. Hisham, Al Jazeera.
Well, let's bring our guests into the show now. We have in Beirut Hisham, retired Lebanese army general and strategic analyst. In Liverpool, Mohammed Jumaih, writer for Al-Quds Al-Arabi and a political analyst. And also in Beirut, Adam Barron, visiting fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Welcome to all. If we could start with Adam, how significant is the progress that the coalition have made in Taiz?
I think it's an extremely significant development. We've had fighting in Taiz at a standstill for some time, so this is very significant on a military and political level.
Is it a breakthrough though,
now
Adam?
You have the opportunity for the coalition or pro-coalition forces. I mean, it depends on how you want to define breakthrough. I think for Taiz, it's a breakthrough. But I mean, you have these senses where people will always say, you know, people said before, the road to Sanaa goes through Aden, or the road through Sanaa goes through Taiz. But I think it's too soon to say whether this is going to be a huge breakthrough in terms of the battle for Sanaa. That being said, when it comes to securing Taiz, which is the capital of Yemen's most populous province, it's very significant. And I think that alone is a major development when you look at this war.
It's a major development. From a military perspective, though, Hisham, do you think the city will fall?
Even it will fall, maybe, but there are a lot of victims. We cannot forget that more than 1 million inhabitants are in Sanaa, and it's not easy. And if there are fighting, you know, street fighting, I think thousands of victims will, we will see thousands of victims. It's not that easy. And let me tell you something. It's not a matter if we do succeed to occupy a city or a land. The question is, can we remain on that land, on security? Can we control it, and for how long? Let me tell you.
Well, let me ask you those questions then, Hisham. Can the coalition remain on the land and control Taiz?
No, I don't think. Yemen is very difficult, it's very complicated. I think if the coalition will arrive to occupy the whole, in a military point of view, to control, to occupy all Yemen, I am not sure that can they control it. It's very difficult, it's very complicated. It may remain years, you know, and that reminds me of Somalia. Look throughout the history, I think Yemen is different than any other places. Yemen, if you study the history, you find no one could control Yemen, especially when they come from outside. Yemen is very difficult. For 1 year, the very severe and very complicated war going on in Yemen. Every day there are air strikes. Every day they are fighting, and hundreds of victims every week. And there is accusation from the international community to both sides for violation of human rights. And let me tell you something, and to be frank, both sides are getting tired of this war in Yemen, especially Saudi Arabia also. And now we have, today, maybe 4 points, positive points, we can put it in a kind of breakthrough of this closed cycle. First of all, the exchange of POWs on the borders, 1 officer from Saudi Arabia against 7 Houthis, for example. Houthi delegation went to the borders to Saudi Arabia to discuss a potential ceasefire.
Hisham, I'm going to jump in there because we will come back to talk about the political side of things. But before we stray too far off the military battlefield, I want to ask Mohammed, despite the difficulties which Hisham is mentioning there, the historical difficulties of conflict in Yemen, we have seen the tide turned against the Houthis, haven't we? We've seen them pushed out of some areas in the south, out of Aden and so on and so forth. What's turned the tide, do you think?
Well, I think now about 7 to 75% of the land is out of the control of the Houthis and Salah's forces. In terms of occupations, I disagree with your guest from Beirut that there is any sort of occupation from outside or invaders from outside Yemen. There is a legitimate government in Yemen which was kicked out of the country by the Houthis and Salah, and this government, the president, the legitimate president, asked for help and support from the neighboring Arabs, and they made the Saudi-led coalition to support this government. And most of the forces on the ground are Yemenis, in Aden, in Taiz, in Marib, in most of the countries. The coalition, the Saudi coalitions have participated mainly by airstrikes, but on the ground, maybe 95% or more than that of the fighters, soldiers, and popular resistance members are Yemenis. So,
right, Mohammed, can they hold the territory they've captured? And can they expand it on? How much of a threat is this to Sanaa?
This is a very good question. I think the only problems are in Yemen in about 2 or 3 cities, in Aden and some other cities, which this problem was there even during the former regime, during the Mr. Salah's regime. Now it's continued. It's the regime, Salah's regime, tried to say to the international community that ISIS will control the country if I have to leave. This is his excuse to say empower and to ask for help from the Russians, from other countries to fight ISIS. I think Yemen is different. Yemen is not Syria. There is a legitimate government which is fighting to restore its authority, to restore the capital, to take it back from the coup forces. And what happened in Taiz, I think it's a great breakthrough in the Battle of Taiz, and it's a big jump, a big step to Sanaa, towards the I think the final battle to the capital.
Okay, let's bring Adam back into the discussion. Does Taiz change at all the analysis of those who say this is a battle that cannot be won militarily? Does that show that the fight can be taken to the Houthis much further north than Aden and some of the southern areas?
I wouldn't necessarily say that. I mean, Taiz has always been a hotbed of both anti-Houthi and anti-Saleh sentiment. As Mohammed pointed out from Liverpool, you know, the vast majority of people who are fighting in Taiz are Taizis who are fighting against the Houthis. So this is, in a sense, I'm surprised that the Houthis in Saleh managed to hold down in Taiz as long as they did. This is an area that was the hotbed, for example, of the 2011 uprising against Saleh. But once you get closer to Sanaa, and especially once you get north of Sanaa, these are areas that are the Houthi strongholds. The Houthis, of course, are in their essence Zaidi revivalists, followers of Zaydism, which is a type brand of Shiism from northern Yemen. And you know, the north is the Zaidi heartland. So once you get closer to that area, once you get closer to the traditional strongholds of the Houthi movement, I think it still becomes very difficult for me to imagine anti-Houthi forces making significant gains without a tremendous amount of bloodshed on both sides.
Let's come back to Hisham then. What do you make of suggestions that the alliance between Saleh, Ali Abdullah Saleh, the former president of Yemen, of course many units of the military are loyal to him, but the saying goes that the alliance between him and his units and between the Houthi rebels on the other hand is starting to break down?
Yes, if you go, you know, 10 years back and 15 years back, we find that Ali Abdullah Saleh, when he was in power, was against the Houthis, and he made several wars against the Houthis. Now they are allies. Of course, there are divergences and a political point of view between them. There is concurrence between them. Who's going to be the representative of this side, you know, facing Saudi Arabia and its allies in Yemen? We heard that yesterday that there is some conflict. I didn't say military conflict, but political dispute, if you want, between Ali Abdullah Saleh and the Houthis. Who will come first in case they will sit on the negotiation table to negotiate a peaceful solution in Yemen. This is about the Houthis and Ali Abdullah Saleh. But I would say, I will continue what the positive point, what I said, that we heard yesterday a VIP or important figure in the Houthis, you know, his name is Yunus Fishi, who asked Iran to stay away from Yemen after the you know, speech of Iranian responsible who said they will help, that Iran will help, will interfere in Yemen. That figure, who is Houthi, asked Iran to stay away and not to interfere in Yemen's affair, which present a positive point, you know, in breakthrough, in kind of breakthrough or goodwill, you know, towards Saudi Arabia. Also, not forget that, as we said, both are getting tired, and there is no military solution in Yemen. We said this for 1 year, and when we hear some comment, and I think Saudi Arabia made a non-well-calculated strategy, which we call it enter-strategy, in order to achieve political objectives.
Right.
Saudi Arabia did not achieve any political objective yet in Yemen. To be honest, to be objective, and to be fair, not yet. And I don't think, and I insist that even if in a military point of view, you arrive to control, not to control, to occupy, and to the whole Yemen, doesn't mean the game is over, doesn't mean this is the end, you know, of the problems. I think it will be a new problem will start.
All right,
this
well,
is
before we get into new problems, I like the point that you've raised there, Mr. Hisham, about the political objectives, and perhaps this is a good segue to talk about the political talks which are going on in Saudi Arabia. Mohammed, do you think that the parties have decided, have they reached the point, the parties to this conflict, where they've decided they need to resolve this problem now through talks? Is there more of a resolve, and is that the reason we're seeing a Houthi delegation in Saudi Arabia right now?
I think so. Most of the parties inside and outside the country think that at the end of the day, there must be a political solution, not a military solution. From the Saudi-led coalition, they think that these military acts are there to make the Houthis accept the United Nations resolutions 2216, and other resolutions, and also to accept the outcomes of the national dialogue in Yemen, which all Yemenis agreed in the beginning of 2014. So the military acts in Yemen is to achieve and to fulfill the political solution. No one can win this war by military forces or by military means, but it is to convince those who are until now rejecting to accept and to implement the United Nations resolutions regarding Yemen. When they come to this point, I think everything will be there to pave the way in order to achieve the political solution.
Okay, hang on there,
to Saudi Arabia,
I can see Hisham wants to get in there. I'll give you a brief opportunity to come back in and perhaps tell us, Hisham, what you think a settlement looks like. That's a question that hasn't often been asked. What exactly does a settlement leave Yemen looking like if one is reached between the Houthis and Saudis?
Let me tell you something. Of course, military success will give you a strong cards when you sit on the negotiation table. It's normal for both sides, and the Saudis are trying with this military success because they know they will sit at the end of the day, like your guest said, on the table. But
what kind of Yemen would be acceptable to the Houthis, to its neighbors, to the legitimate government of Yemen?
First of all, we have to forget about the solution 2216. It's expired, in my opinion. We have to look at the present now. What Yemen we do imagine to be. Yemen, you know, we cannot decide on this table the future of the Yemen. The Yemeni will decide whether their Yemen will be federal, for example, or one unit, and every Yemeni, you know, Yemen will be running by all factions in Yemen. This is the solution. Otherwise, every faction in Yemen, every political or ethnic or whatever in Yemen will feel that they put him aside. It will not Yemen will not remain stable. In my opinion, Yemen is for the whole Yemenis. Of course, no one can deny the influence or the role of their neighbors, Saudi Arabia and the other countries in the Gulf. They have to recognize this. But Yemen, throughout the history, is very special in geography and very special throughout the history.
All right, I can see Mohammed now is shaking his head. Before I give you a chance, Mohammed, to come back in, I know you want to come back in, but I want to ask Adam, you know, Hisham mentioned a moment ago the comments made by a senior Houthi official, Yusuf al-Fishi, on his Facebook page, which kind of indicated that they didn't want Iran to be interfering in Yemen's affairs, or at least that's the way it was interpreted. Do you think there's a rethink going on within the Houthi camp concerning their relationship with Iran and Iran's role, or is that just something for perhaps regional consumption as it approaches Saudi Arabia?
I mean, it's always been an alliance of convenience more than anything when it comes both on the Iranian side and on the Houthi side. I mean, for the Iranians, the Houthis were a very convenient way of kind of poking Saudi Arabia, a low investment way of doing that. And for the Houthis, I mean, let's face it, the Iranians have done very little to help the Houthis since the war began, and have effectively just kind of allowed them to be something that they capitalize on. You know, treating the Yemen war as something to capitalize on in terms of on the media sphere.
So hang on, Adam. Does that mean that you're saying that perhaps Iran is not on? Is Iran on board with the sort of peace moves or talks which are being put together in Saudi Arabia, or is that something that is not taking place with Iran?
I mean, that's a good question. I think there's definitely an element that Iran is benefiting from the conflict continuing in Yemen. I think from a cynical perspective, if you look at this from Iran's perspective, they want Saudi Arabia bogged down in this war as long as possible. So I think from a cynical perspective, the Iranians would not be displeased to see this war continue indefinitely. Whereas for the Houthis, obviously, it's completely different. The Houthis, you know, they want the war to end. So I think that's interesting. I mean, this is a very interesting development, and it wasn't just Yusuf al-Fishi, one, and it was other Houthi officials echoed it. And then at the same time, this is what is you see what is now being said publicly from al-Fishi and others, reflecting the resentments a lot of Houthi officials have been expressing privately about Iran for some time.
Well,
so I think it's certainly an interesting development. I mean, the fact of the matter is, when you look at it from the Houthis' perspective, they're right across the border from Saudi Arabia, whereas Iran is very far away. So they've got to deal. I mean, both the Houthis and Saudi Arabia will have to learn to live with each other somehow. The question is how long it takes for them to figure out how exactly, which shape that relationship will be.
One party which won't be happy to see this conflict go on any further, of course, is the UN, because it's already warning of a humanitarian crisis across Yemen. It says almost 2,800 civilians have been killed since the Saudi-led intervention began last March. More than 5,300 Yemenis have been injured, and 21 million people, that's more than 80% of the population, need some kind of humanitarian aid. More than 2.5 million people have been forced from their homes. A very dire situation. Mohammed, I promised I would give you a chance to come back in, and I think we've only got a minute or two, so let me give you an opportunity to come back in on some of the points you were shaking your head in disagreement upon just a moment ago.
Yeah, I agree with Hisham that at the end of the day there will be a political solution, but I don't know from where he took this idea that the United Nations resolution 2216 is, as he said, expired, is out of reach. Even the Houthis and Ali Abdullah Saleh, until now, they still announce that they accept this resolution 2216, but they want to go around it. They want to accept it, and they want to implement it the way they want and the way they interpret it themselves. But all parties, inside, outside, regionally, nationally, and internationally, they say that the solution in Yemen, political solution in Yemen, must be based on this resolution 2216.
Okay, but Mohammed, then very briefly, I think we've got 30 seconds. Is there a political settlement, you think, that could appease all the parties to this conflict? A political order that could rise in Yemen that could make everybody happy?
Yes, we have three legitimacy in Yemen. The national legitimacy, which is the outcomes of the national dialogue, and the Arabic legitimacy, which is the Gulf States Initiative, and the international legitimacy, which is based on the United Nations Resolution, Security Council Resolution 2211 and other resolutions. If all parties accept and agree to go according to these three legitimacies, then at the end of the day, I think we will see a political solution.
Let's hope the political solution is found soon, but for now, let's thank our guests. We're out of time on this show. I'm sure we'll be back to discuss it, though, in the not too distant future. Let's thank Hisham, Mohammed and Adam. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, just head over to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Or you can join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle there @AJ Inside Story. From me, Sami Zeidan, and on behalf of the whole team, for now, it's goodbye.